The church bells had not yet fallen silent when Nathaniel Harrington, the Duke of Stonehaven, realized his bride was gone. The carriage that should have carried them to his estate sat empty in the lantern-lit courtyard. The white ribbons tied to the horses' harnesses fluttered in the evening breeze, mocking him. Inside the church, 400 guests still waited in the candle-lit nave, their whispers growing louder with each passing minute. Nathaniel stood in the vestry, still wearing his wedding coat of dark blue velvet, staring at the folded letter his steward had pressed into his hand moments ago. The wax seal was unbroken. The handwriting on the outside was hers, Amelia's, delicate and precise, the letters slanting forward as if even her penmanship was eager to escape. He broke the seal. "My Lord Duke, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot explain my reasons without endangering lives you hold dear. Please believe that what I do to protect you. Do not search for me. Forget me if you can. Forgive me if you are able. Amelia." The paper trembled in his grip. Someone laughed in the church beyond the heavy oak door, a nervous, uncertain sound. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself had travelled from London to perform this ceremony. The Prince Regent had sent his personal congratulations. Every noble family of consequence had gathered to witness the union of the Duke of Stonehaven and Lady Amelia Sinclair, and she had vanished. Nathaniel read the letter 3 more times, searching for hidden meaning in each word. To protect you. What threat could possibly justify this humiliation? What danger could be so terrible that she would abandon him at the altar without a word of explanation? His steward, Mr. Harding, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, the guests are growing restless. The Archbishop inquires whether there will be no wedding." The words fell from Nathaniel's lips like stones into still water. He heard Harding's sharp intake of breath, heard the muffled commotion as the news spread from the vestry to the nave, from the nave to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the carriages waiting in the lane, heard the gasps, the shocked laughter, the delighted scandal that would feed London's drawing rooms for months. But he felt nothing. The numbness had already settled into his bones like winter frost. He walked out of the vestry, past the gaping Archbishop, past the sea of astonished faces, past his mother's white-gloved hand reaching for his arm. He walked down the stone steps of the church and into the cool September night. Behind him, his best man called his name. His sister wept. His mother's voice rose in sharp command. Nathaniel did not turn around. He climbed into the empty carriage, closed the door, and rapped his knuckles against the roof. The driver, confused but obedient, flicked the reins. The carriage rolled away from the church, leaving behind the flowers, the music, the feast, and the woman who should have been sitting beside him. That night, the Duke of Stonehaven sat alone in his library, still wearing his wedding coat, staring at the dying embers in the hearth. He did not rage. He simply waited for the numbness to fade and the pain to begin. It did not come. The numbness remained for 20 years. Amelia Sinclair had not planned to disappear on her wedding night. She had planned to marry Nathaniel Harrington, to become his Duchess, to spend the rest of her life waking beside him in the vast stone corridors of Stonehaven Castle. She had planned to give him children, with his dark hair and steady grey eyes. She had planned to grow old in the gardens she would plant on the eastern terrace, the ones that caught the morning light. She had planned all of this. But plans, as Amelia had learned painfully and repeatedly throughout her 22 years, were fragile things. The man who came to her chamber 2 hours before the ceremony was not a servant, though he wore a servant's livery. Amelia recognized the cold precision of his movements, the way his eyes swept the room before settling on her. This was a man accustomed to violence, and he had come to deliver a message. "Your brother sends his regards, my lady." Amelia's blood turned to ice. Her brother, Thomas Sinclair, the man who had gambled away their family fortune before their father's body was cold in the ground. The man who had disappeared to the continent 5 years ago, leaving Amelia to manage their crumbling estate with nothing but determination and the kindness of distant relatives. The man who had sworn, in his last drunken letter, that he would rather see her dead than married to a Harrington. "What does Thomas want?" Amelia asked, proud that her voice did not tremble. The man smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Lord Sinclair requests that you decline the Duke's generous offer of marriage, immediately, publicly, and permanently." "And if I refuse?" then Lord Sinclair will be forced to share certain information with the Crown. Information regarding the late Duke of Stonehaven's involvement with French agents during the war. Amelia's heart stopped. That's a lie. The late Duke was loyal to the Crown. Was he? Lord Sinclair has letters that suggest otherwise. Letters in the Duke's own hand. Letters that would destroy the Harrington name and send the current Duke's mother and sisters into disgrace, if not worse. The man stepped closer, and Amelia caught the scent of tobacco and something metallic. Blood, perhaps, or the memory of it. Your brother is not a patient man, my lady. He has debts. Powerful debts. The Duke of Stonehaven's enemies would pay handsomely for evidence of his father's treason. But if you refuse the marriage, if you humiliate the Duke so thoroughly that he never wishes to see your face again, Lord Sinclair will burn the letters. The Harrington family will remain safe. The Duke will hate you, but he will be alive and free. Amelia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, hidden beneath the folds of her wedding gown. The gown she had spent 3 months sewing. The gown she had imagined Nathaniel seeing, imagined his eyes warming with that rare, quiet approval he showed so sparingly. You expect me to believe that my brother possesses such letters? I expect you to believe that your brother is desperate enough to destroy everyone you love if you defy him. The man withdrew a folded paper from his coat. Proof, my lady, a sample of the late Duke's correspondence. Judge for yourself. Amelia took the paper. Her fingers felt clumsy, numb. She unfolded it and recognized immediately the bold, slashing handwriting that had signed 100 official documents. The late Duke of Stonehaven's hand was unmistakable. The words made her stomach turn. The shipment will arrive at Calais on the 15th. My contact will ensure safe passage through the blockade. For God's sake, burn this letter. If anyone discovers what we have done... She could not read further. She folded the paper with shaking hands. There are 12 more letters, the man said. Each more damning than the last. Lord Sinclair's instructions are simple. You will write a letter to the Duke explaining your departure. You will leave before the ceremony. You will never contact him or his family again. If you do, the letters will be delivered to the Lord Chancellor within the hour. And if I warn Nathaniel? If I tell him what Thomas is planning? Then the letters go to the Crown immediately, and the Duke of Stonehaven will spend his wedding night in the Tower. Your choice, my lady. It was not a choice. Amelia knew that immediately. Nathaniel was a powerful man, but accusations of treason could destroy even the mightiest. His father's reputation, his mother's security, his younger sister's marriage prospects. All of it would burn if those letters saw daylight. She could not let that happen. She loved him too much to let that happen. So Amelia Sinclair wrote the letter. She folded it carefully. She sealed it with wax that felt heavier than stone. She gave it to the false servant, who promised it would be delivered at the proper moment. Then she removed her wedding gown. She dressed in the plain grey travelling dress her maid had brought for the honeymoon journey. She took nothing but a small bag of coins and the locket Nathaniel had given her for her 19th birthday, a tiny gold oval containing a miniature of his mother's rose garden, the place where he had first told her he loved her. She slipped out through the servants' entrance as the church bells began to ring. She did not look back. She could not look back. If she looked back, she would run to him, and if she ran to him, he would die. So Amelia Sinclair walked into the gathering dusk, leaving behind her name, her future, and the only man she had ever loved. She did not know that it would take 20 years to find her way home. The years were not kind to Amelia Sinclair. She fled north, away from London, away from the life she had known. She changed her name to Margaret Hale and took work as a governess in Yorkshire, then as a companion to an elderly widow in Northumberland, then as a schoolteacher in a small village near the Scottish border. She wrote letters to Nathaniel 100 times. She burned every one. Thomas Sinclair died within 3 years, killed in a tavern brawl in Marseille. The news reached Amelia through a distant cousin who did not know her secret. The man who had delivered Thomas's threats was never heard from again. But the letters remained. The false evidence of the late Duke's treason, hidden somewhere by a dead man's dead henchman. Amelia did not know where they were. She did not know who else knew of their existence. She only knew that as long as those letters might surface, she could not risk returning to Nathaniel's life. So she stayed hidden. She watched from a distance as the Duke of Stonehaven became one of the most powerful men in England. She read about him in newspapers smuggled north by traveling merchants. She learned of his political triumphs, his growing fortune, his reputation as a man of unshakable integrity and terrifying reserve. She learned, with a pain that never dulled, that he had never married. 20 years passed. The girl who had fled a wedding became a woman of 42, with grey threading her dark hair and lines of sorrow etched around her eyes. She had made a quiet life for herself, respected in her village, loved by the children she taught, but she had never stopped loving Nathaniel Harrington. She had never stopped dreaming of his face, and she had never stopped searching for the letters. It took 2 decades, but eventually she found them. The letters were hidden in the attic of an abandoned hunting lodge in Derbyshire, the former property of a baron who had died without heirs. Thomas Sinclair had paid the lodge's caretaker to store a locked box there, never knowing that the caretaker would die of fever 6 months later, leaving the box to gather dust for 20 years. Amelia found it through a chain of inquiries that began with a drunken confession from one of Thomas's former gambling associates, and ended with a trembling hand turning a rusted key in a lock that had not been opened since the last century. Inside the box were 13 letters. 12 were forgeries, clever forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. The 13th was a confession in Thomas's handwriting, detailing how he had paid a disgraced clerk to copy the late Duke's hand, how he had manufactured evidence of treason to manipulate his sister into destroying her own happiness. Thomas had never intended to send the letters to the Crown. The threats had been empty all along. He had simply wanted Amelia to suffer. She read her brother's confession by candlelight in the dusty attic, and for the first time in 20 years, Amelia Sinclair wept. She wept for the years she had lost. She wept for the love she had abandoned. She wept for the man she had left standing at the altar, humiliated and betrayed, never knowing that she had sacrificed everything to save him from a danger that had never existed. And when the weeping stopped, she made a decision. She would return to Stonehaven. She would tell Nathaniel the truth, even if he hated her, even if he turned her away, even if 20 years of silence could never be forgiven. He deserved to know. The Duke of Stonehaven was 45 years old, and he had not smiled in 2 decades. This was not entirely true. He smiled at his sister's children when they visited. He smiled at his dogs, a pack of lazy wolfhounds who followed him through the castle corridors. He smiled, occasionally and briefly, when his steward delivered news of a particularly successful harvest or a political rival's misfortune. But the smile that had once transformed his stern features into something approaching warmth, that smile had died on his wedding night, and it had never been resurrected. Nathaniel Harrington had become a legend in his own lifetime, the Duke who was jilted, the bachelor Duke, the Stone Duke of Stonehaven, whose heart had turned to granite the moment his bride disappeared. Society had speculated endlessly about his reasons for remaining unmarried. Some said he still loved Amelia Sinclair. Some said he had sworn never to trust a woman again. Some whispered darker theories, that he had driven her away, that she had discovered something terrible about him, that their marriage had been a sham from the beginning. Nathaniel ignored them all. He managed his estates with ruthless efficiency. He wielded his political influence with calculated precision. He maintained the Harrington legacy with the same cold dedication his father and grandfather had shown before him, and he never, ever spoke of Amelia Sinclair. His family learned not to mention her name. His servants knew to remove any newspaper that referenced her disappearance. The portrait she had sat for before the wedding, a luminous study in oils that captured her dark hair and gentle eyes, had been taken down from the great hall and stored in an unused tower room, facing the wall. Nathaniel had not looked at it in 20 years. He had not needed to. Her face was burned into his memory more permanently than any painting. He remembered the way she laughed, a soft, surprised sound, as if joy always caught her off guard. He remembered the way she listened, head tilted slightly, giving his words her complete attention. He remembered the feel of her hand in his, small and warm and impossibly trusting. He remembered the letter. "Do not search for me. Forget me if you can." He had searched. God help him, he had searched. In those first desperate months, he had hired investigators across England and the continent. He had traced her movements as far as York, and then the trail had vanished like morning mist. He had received reports of a woman matching her description in Edinburgh, in Dublin, in a dozen other cities. None of them had been her. Eventually, he had stopped searching, not because he had given up hope, that had died long before, but because he had realized that Amelia did not want to be found. Whatever her reasons for leaving, she had chosen to stay hidden, and Nathaniel, who had spent his entire life learning to control outcomes, had finally confronted something he could not change. So he had buried his love for her in the deepest part of his heart and covered it with 20 years of cold, immovable stone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. Nathaniel was in his study, reviewing estate accounts, when Harding entered with the silver salver that meant official correspondence. The letter on top was addressed in a handwriting that made Nathaniel's heart stop. He had not seen that handwriting in 20 years. He would have recognized it anywhere. The delicate slant, the precise loops, the way the letters seemed to lean forward, eager and urgent. "Leave me," Nathaniel said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Harding bowed and withdrew. The door clicked shut. Nathaniel stared at the letter for a long moment. His hands, steady through years of political negotiations and financial crises, were trembling. He was the Duke of Stonehaven. He did not tremble. He did not fear. He did not feel. He opened the letter. "Nathaniel, I know I have no right to write to you. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or your attention. I know that what I did 20 years ago caused you pain that no words can repair. But I must see you. I must explain. There are things you do not know, things I should have told you long ago, and I cannot carry this silence any longer. I am staying at the inn in Stonehaven Village. I will wait there for 3 days, hoping you will come. If you do not, I will understand. I will leave and never trouble you again. I have never stopped loving you. That is the truest thing I know, and I should have told you 20 years ago. Amelia." Nathaniel read the letter 7 times. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out across the grounds that had been his family's home for 300 years. The morning light slanted across the gardens, catching the last blooms of summer roses. His mother's roses, the ones Amelia had loved. His hands were still trembling. She came back. The thought was impossible, incomprehensible. For 20 years he had imagined this moment. What he would do, what he would say, how he would feel if Amelia Sinclair ever returned. He had imagined cold indifference, dignified rejection, the satisfaction of watching her realize what she had thrown away. None of those imaginings had prepared him for the reality. The reality was that his heart, which he had believed incapable of feeling anything, was suddenly pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The reality was that every memory he had suppressed for 2 decades was flooding back with unbearable vividness. The reality was that he wanted to see her, desperately, immediately, more than he had wanted anything in 20 years. And that made him angrier than he had ever been. The inn at Stonehaven Village was a modest establishment, clean and well-maintained, frequented by travelers who could not afford the grander accommodations in the nearby market town. Nathaniel's carriage pulled up before it as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. He had not sent word ahead. He had not told anyone where he was going. He had simply ordered his horse saddled and ridden down from the castle alone, wearing a plain coat that did not advertise his rank. He did not want attention. He did not want gossip. He wanted answers. The innkeeper's wife recognized him immediately, despite his efforts, and nearly dropped the tankard she was polishing. "Your Grace, we were not expecting. If we had known you were coming. The woman who arrived yesterday, where is she?" The innkeeper's wife blinked. "Mrs. Hale. She is in the private parlor, Your Grace." "Shall I—" "Mrs. Hale," Nathaniel repeated. "Is that the name she gave?" "Yes, Your Grace. A widow," she said. "Quiet. Very polite. She paid for 3 nights in advance." The woman hesitated. Is there something wrong?" Nathaniel did not answer. He walked past her toward the parlor door. His hand was on the handle when he stopped. For 20 years, he had lived inside walls of his own making. Walls of duty and control, and carefully maintained indifference. He had built an entire identity on being the man who felt nothing, the Duke whose heart had been replaced by stone. But on the other side of this door was the woman who had shattered him. He opened the door. She was standing by the window, looking out at the village street, and when she turned, Nathaniel felt the floor shift beneath his feet. She was older. Of course she was older. 20 years had drawn lines around her eyes and threaded silver through her dark hair. She was thinner than he remembered. and there was a quiet stillness about her that the young Amelia had never possessed. The girl who had laughed and danced and filled every room with her brightness had become a woman who carried her light more carefully, more guardedly. But her eyes were the same. Those gentle, intelligent eyes that had looked at him with such complete trust, such absolute love, 20 years ago. "Nathaniel," she whispered. Her voice was the same too, soft and warm, with that slight catch that had always made his name sound like a prayer. "Amelia." He heard the coldness in his own voice and was grateful for it. "Or should I call you Mrs. Hale?" She flinched. "It was the name I used. To stay hidden." "Hidden from what?" "From the people who would have hurt you if I had returned." The answer caught him off guard. He had prepared himself for excuses, for apologies, for tearful explanations that placed the blame elsewhere. He had not prepared for this quiet certainty, this implication that her disappearance had been an act of protection rather than abandonment. "What are you talking about?" Amelia gestured to the table beside her, where a leather portfolio sat. "I brought something to show you. Letters. Forged letters. And a confession." She told him everything. She told him about Thomas's threats, about the forged correspondence, about the man who had come to her chamber before the wedding. She told him about her flight north, her years of hiding, her endless, fruitless search for the evidence that had trapped her. She told him about the hunting lodge, the locked box, the confession in her brother's hand. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. His face revealed nothing, but inside, a storm was building. When she finished, she opened the portfolio and placed the letters on the table. 13 pieces of paper, yellowed with age, covered in handwriting that looked exactly like his father's. "Read them," Amelia said. "Read Thomas's confession. You will see that I am telling the truth." Nathaniel picked up the first letter. He scanned the lines, recognizing the forged hand, the fabricated references to French contacts and secret shipments. His father had been many things: ambitious, proud, occasionally ruthless, but he had never been a traitor. The very idea was absurd. He read the confession next. Thomas Sinclair's handwriting was sloppy, feverish, the words of a man consumed by resentment and desperation. "I never intended to send the letters. I only wanted to destroy her happiness. She chose a Harrington over her own blood, and for that she deserved to suffer." 20 years, Nathaniel said quietly. "You stayed away for 20 years, because of a threat that was never real. Yes, you could have come to me. You could have told me what Thomas was doing. I would have protected you. I would have—" "He said he would deliver the letters to the crown immediately, if I warned you. He said you would spend our wedding night in the tower." Amelia's voice cracked. "I was 22 years old, Nathaniel. I was terrified. I believed him. You should have trusted me. I trusted that my brother was capable of destroying you, and I was right. He was capable. The letters may be forgeries, but they are convincing forgeries. If they had been made public 20 years ago, before you had established your own reputation, before anyone knew you as anything but your father's son," she shook her head, "it would have been enough. Enough to ruin you. Enough to destroy your family. I could not risk that." Nathaniel stared at the letters on the table. The evidence of 20 wasted years. The proof that the woman he had loved, the woman he had never stopped loving, had sacrificed everything to protect him from a danger that had never existed. The anger was still there, burning in his chest, but beneath it, something else was stirring. Something he had not felt in 2 decades. Hope. "Why now?" he asked. "Why did you come back now?" "Because I finally found the letters. Because I finally knew it was safe." Amelia met his eyes, and there were tears on her cheeks. "Because I have spent 20 years loving you from a distance, and I could not bear to spend 20 more without at least trying to explain." She took a step toward him. "I know you may never forgive me. I know I hurt you in ways that cannot be undone, but I needed you to know the truth. Whatever you decide to do with it, whatever you decide to do with me, I needed you to know." Nathaniel looked at the woman standing before him, the woman who had vanished on their wedding night, the woman he had spent 2 decades trying to forget, the woman he had never stopped loving, no matter how deeply he buried it. She was older now, they both were. 20 years of silence lay between them, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. But she had come back. She had come back. He did not forgive her that day. Nathaniel Harrington was not a man who forgave easily, and 2 decades of suppressed pain could not be undone by a single conversation, no matter how honest. But he did not send her away either. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He invited her to Stonehaven Castle. "The inn is not suitable for a prolonged stay," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "If you are willing, you may have rooms at the castle. We have much to discuss." Amelia stared at him. "You want me to stay? At Stonehaven? I want answers to questions I have spent 20 years asking myself. I want to understand what happened, in full, and I want—" He paused, struggling with words that did not come naturally. "I want time. To think, to process what you have told me. I will stay as long as you wish." And so Amelia Sinclair, who had been Margaret Hale for 20 years, returned to the castle that should have been her home. The servants did not know what to make of her. Some of the older staff remembered her from before, remembered the bright young woman who had won their stern duke's heart, remembered the wedding that never happened, remembered the scandal and the whispers. They treated her with cautious politeness, uncertain whether she was a returning mistress or an unwelcome intruder. Nathaniel's mother, the Dowager Duchess, was less restrained. She arrived at the castle 3 days after Amelia's return, having heard the news from a network of informants that put the Crown's intelligence service to shame. Lady Harrington was 72 years old, sharp-tongued and sharp-eyed, and she had not forgotten the humiliation of watching her son stand alone at the altar, while 400 guests whispered behind their fans. "You have nerve," the Dowager Duchess said, sweeping into the morning room where Amelia sat reading. "I will grant you that, to show your face here, after what you did." Amelia rose and curtsied. "Your Grace, I know I have no right to be here. I know I caused your family terrible pain. I can only say that I am sorry, and that I had reasons." "Reasons?" The older woman's voice dripped with contempt. "What reasons could possibly justify abandoning my son on his wedding day?" Amelia told her. She told the Dowager Duchess everything she had told Nathaniel, holding nothing back. When she finished, Lady Harrington was silent for a long moment. "You believe these threats were real?" "I believed them completely. I was young and frightened, and my brother had never shown me anything but cruelty. It did not occur to me that he might be bluffing." "And you stayed away for 20 years? Even after Thomas died? The letters were still hidden. I did not know where. I did not know who else might know of them. I could not risk returning until I found them and destroyed them." Amelia met the Dowager's eyes steadily. "I loved your son. I have always loved your son. Everything I did to protect him." Lady Harrington studied her for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes shifted, some of the hardness giving way to something more complicated. "You know he never married," she said quietly. "You know he never even looked at another woman. 20 years, and he has been alone, because of you." "I know? Is your love still strong enough to make up for that?" Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know, but I would like the chance to try." The Dowager Duchess said nothing more. She turned and left the morning room, her cane tapping against the marble floor. But before she reached the door, she paused. "The rose garden," she said, not turning around. "He has not touched it since you left. He used to love those roses. His father planted them for me on our first anniversary. Now they are overgrown and dying. If you truly wish to prove your love, Miss Sinclair, you might start there." And then she was gone, leaving Amelia alone with the weight of her words. The rose garden had once been the pride of Stonehaven. Amelia remembered it from her first visit to the castle, when she was 18 years old, and Nathaniel was courting her with the careful formality that had seemed, to her youthful eyes, the height of romance. He had walked her through the garden at sunset, pointing out each variety of rose as if introducing her to old friends. The damask roses, deep pink and heavily scented. The white Alba roses, which his mother claimed bloomed only for true love. The crimson Gallica roses, which his great-grandmother had brought from France a century ago. "One day," Nathaniel had said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "this garden will be yours, if you want it." Amelia had wanted it desperately. Not just the garden, but everything it represented. A home, a family, a future with the stern young duke who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. Now, standing at the edge of that same garden 22 years later, she barely recognized it. The roses had run wild. The carefully pruned bushes had grown into tangled thickets, their branches intertwining in a thorny maze. The gravel paths were choked with weeds. The ornamental fountain at the garden's center was dry and cracked, its stone basin filled with dead leaves. Only a few hardy blooms still struggled through the chaos. A splash of pink here, a cluster of white there, but most of the plants had reverted to wild brambles, producing small, pale flowers that bore no resemblance to the cultivated beauties they had once been. It was, Amelia realized, a perfect metaphor for Nathaniel's heart. He had locked away everything that reminded him of her, letting it wither from neglect rather than risk the pain of tending it. She began work the next morning. The head gardener, a weathered man named Collins who had served at Stonehaven for 40 years, was initially skeptical. "Her Grace has been after His Grace for years, to restore this garden," he said, watching Amelia pull on a pair of work gloves. "He always refused, said he wanted it left alone." "I am not asking his permission," Amelia said. "I am asking yours. Will you help me?" Collins studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I remember you, my lady, from before. You were the only one who ever asked me the names of the roses. Will you help me, Mr. Collins?" "Aye," he said. "I believe I will." They worked together through the autumn weeks, clearing the dead wood, pruning the living branches, digging out the weeds that had strangled the flower beds. Amelia's hands blistered and bled, unaccustomed to such labor, but she did not stop. Each thorn that pierced her skin felt like penance. Each cleared patch of earth felt like progress. She did not see Nathaniel during those first days. He was avoiding her, she knew, retreating to his study, leaving for meetings in the village, taking long rides across the estate that kept him away from the castle until nightfall. She did not press him. She had waited 20 years to explain herself. She could wait a little longer for his forgiveness. But she felt his presence everywhere. In the portraits that lined the great hall, faces of Harringtons who had lived and died within these walls. In the library, where he had once read poetry to her, his deep voice making even the most mundane verses sound like music. In the East Tower room where she knew, though no one had told her, her portrait still hung facing the wall. She did not go to that room. She was not ready, not yet. Instead, she worked in the garden, and she waited. The Dowager Duchess came to the garden on the 10th day. Amelia was kneeling in the dirt, planting a new damask rose to replace one that had died years ago, when she heard the tap of the cane against the gravel path. She looked up to find Lady Harrington watching her with an expression that was no longer hostile, but not yet warm. "You are persistent," the Dowager said. "I will give you that. I have had 20 years to learn patience, Your Grace." The older woman surveyed the garden, noting the cleared paths, the pruned bushes, the newly turned earth. "It looks better already. I did not think anything could bring this garden back." Gardens are resilient. They can survive a great deal of neglect, if the roots are strong enough. "And my son, do you think he is resilient enough to survive your return?" Amelia sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her forehead. "I do not know. I hope so. But I will not force him. If he decides he cannot forgive me, I will leave. I promised him that." "And would you? Leave, I mean, if he asked it?" "Yes." The word hurt to say, but Amelia meant it. "I have spent 20 years protecting him from a distance. If the best way to protect him now is to disappear again, I will do it. I love him enough to let him go." The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that Amelia would remember for the rest of her life. She smiled. "You know," she said, "I have watched my son build walls around his heart for 20 years. I have watched him turn away every woman who showed interest in him. I have watched him bury himself in duty and politics and estate management, convincing himself that he did not need love. I began to believe he was incapable of feeling anything anymore." She stepped closer, her cane crunching on the gravel. "But since you returned, I have seen something I have not seen in 2 decades. I have seen him feel. He is angry, and he is hurt, and he is confused, and he does not know what to do with any of those emotions, but he feels them. You have cracked the stone, Amelia. I do not know if you can break through it completely, but you have cracked it." Amelia felt tears welling in her eyes. "Do you think he can ever forgive me?" "I think," the Dowager Duchess said, "that forgiveness is not what he needs. What he needs is to understand that you did not leave because you stopped loving him. What he needs is to believe that you will not leave again. And what he needs," she added, her voice softening, "is to admit to himself that he still loves you, has always loved you, will always love you, no matter how hard he tries not to. She turned to leave, then paused. The portrait, by the way. The one in the East Tower. He has not looked at it in 20 years, but he has not destroyed it either. I think that tells you something, does it not? And then she was gone, leaving Amelia alone with the roses, and the hope that was beginning, slowly and painfully, to bloom again. Nathaniel watched from his study window. He had been watching for days, though he would never have admitted it to anyone. Every morning, he positioned himself behind the heavy velvet curtains, and looked down at the ruined rose garden, where Amelia Sinclair knelt in the dirt, coaxing life back into the dead earth. She worked with a patience that surprised him. The Amelia he remembered had been impatient, eager, always rushing toward the next moment. This Amelia was different, slower, more deliberate. She approached the garden the way she might approach a wounded animal, gently, carefully, with infinite tenderness. He remembered the day he had first shown her those roses. She had been 18, her hair escaping its pins in the evening breeze, her eyes wide with wonder at the beauty of the garden. One day, he had told her, "This garden will be yours," and she had looked at him with such joy, such trust, such complete and unguarded love. He had been planning to propose that night. The words had been on his lips, ready to be spoken, but something had held him back, some fear, some doubt, some instinct that warned him not to rush. So he had waited. He had courted her for 2 more years, slowly earning her trust, slowly letting himself believe that he could have this, could have her, could be happy. And then she had vanished. For 20 years, he had believed she left because she did not love him. That had been the wound that never healed, the certainty that her feelings had been false, that her smiles had been lies, that the woman he had loved more than his own life had never truly loved him at all. Now he knew the truth. She had left because she loved him. She had sacrificed everything, her name, her future, her happiness, to protect him from a threat that had never been real. The knowledge should have been a comfort. Instead, it was a torment, because if she had loved him enough to destroy her own life for his sake, then what did that say about the 20 years they had lost? What did it say about all the days and nights they could have spent together, the children they could have raised, the life they could have built? What did it say about him, that he had let her go so easily? He had searched for her, yes, but he had given up. He had convinced himself that she did not want to be found, and he had retreated into his cold stone fortress, nursing his wounded pride, telling himself that he was better off alone. But he had never been better off alone. He had been empty, hollow, a shell of the man he might have been if she had stayed. And now she was back, kneeling in his mother's ruined rose garden, trying to bring something dead back to life. He wondered if it was possible. He wondered if he was brave enough to try. The first real conversation happened in the library, 3 weeks after Amelia's return. She had come in from the garden, exhausted and dirt-streaked, intending to wash before dinner. But the library door was open, and the firelight spilling into the corridor was too inviting to resist. She stepped inside, drawn by the warmth and the smell of old books, and found Nathaniel standing by the hearth. He turned when he heard her footsteps. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You have been working in the garden," he said finally. "Yes. My mother mentioned it. She said you have made progress." "Some. There is still much to do. 20 years of neglect is not easily undone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with double meaning. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think I did?" he asked quietly. "Neglected my heart for 20 years? "I think," Amelia said carefully, "that you did what you needed to survive. Just as I did." "What did you do? To survive, I mean. All those years alone." She moved closer to the fire, holding out her hands to warm them. "I taught. I kept to myself. I made a quiet life, as far from my past as I could manage." She paused. "I thought of you every day. I wondered if you were happy. I hoped that you were, even though the thought of you being happy without me was unbearable. I was not happy." The admission seemed to surprise him. He looked away, toward the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. "I was not unhappy, either," he continued. "I was simply existing, performing my duties, managing my affairs. I told myself that was enough. I told myself I did not need more. And was it enough? No. The word was barely a whisper. It was never enough." Amelia's heart ached at the pain in his voice. She wanted to go to him, to touch him, to offer whatever comfort she could. But she held herself back. He was not ready for that. She was not sure he ever would be. "I am sorry," she said. "For all of it. For leaving. For not trusting you. For 20 years of silence. I know those words are inadequate. I know they cannot undo what happened. But they are true." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I do not know how to do this, Amelia. I do not know how to trust you again. I do not know how to open myself to the possibility of losing you a second time. I have spent 20 years building walls, and you are asking me to tear them down in a matter of weeks. I am not asking you to do anything. I am only asking you to let me stay, to let me prove, over time, that I will not leave again. And if I cannot believe that, if I cannot stop waiting for you to disappear, then I will keep proving it, for as long as it takes, for the rest of my life, if necessary." He turned to look at her then, and the expression in his eyes was one she had never seen before, a mixture of hope and fear, longing and resistance, love and self-protection. "You would do that?" he asked. "You would stay, even if I could never give you what we might have had?" "I would stay, because being near you, even in silence, even in uncertainty, is better than 20 more years of being apart." She met his eyes steadily. "I love you, Nathaniel. I have always loved you, and I will keep loving you, whether you can love me back or not." The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, and somewhere in the depths of Stonehaven Castle, a door that had been locked for 20 years began, very slowly, to open. Lady Margaret Hargrove arrived at Stonehaven Castle on a Thursday afternoon, and within 3 hours, Amelia understood exactly what kind of threat she represented. Lady Margaret was the daughter of the Earl of Westmore, a neighbouring estate that had shared borders, and occasional tensions, with the Harrington lands for generations. She was 35 years old, exquisitely dressed in dove-grey silk, and possessed of the kind of cool, calculating beauty that came from generations of careful breeding. She had been widowed 3 years ago, inheriting a substantial fortune from her late husband, a baronet who had obligingly died before producing any children. Since then, according to castle gossip, Lady Margaret had made no secret of her intentions toward the Duke of Stonehaven. "She has been pursuing him for 2 years," Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, confided to Amelia over tea one afternoon, inviting herself to dinner, arranging accidental meetings in the village, sending him gifts he never opens. His Grace has shown no interest whatsoever, but she is persistent. Amelia had smiled politely at the time, filing the information away without attaching much significance to it. She had been focused on the garden, on the slow process of rebuilding trust with Nathaniel, on the fragile hope that was beginning to take root in her heart. She had not been prepared for a rival. She was not prepared for Lady Margaret. The woman swept into the drawing room where Amelia was arranging flowers, her gaze immediately sharp and assessing. "You must be the infamous Miss Sinclair," she said, her voice honey-sweet with an undertone of vinegar. "I have heard so much about you. The entire county is buzzing with the news of your return." Amelia set down the rose she had been trimming. "I am sure they are. The scandal of the jilted Duke and his runaway bride has been a favorite topic for 2 decades. I imagine my return has provided fresh material." "Indeed." Lady Margaret settled herself on the settee, arranging her silk skirts with practiced elegance. "One wonders what could possibly have prompted you to come back after all this time. Nostalgia, perhaps? Or something more practical? I beg your pardon?" "Well, you must admit, the timing is suspicious. The Duke is one of the wealthiest men in England, and you are, forgive me, a woman of a certain age, with no family, no fortune, and no prospects. One might be forgiven for thinking you had returned to claim what you threw away 20 years ago." Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "My reasons for returning are between myself and His Grace. They are not a subject for public speculation." "Oh, but they are public, are they not? You made them public when you abandoned him at the altar. You made them public when you disappeared without explanation. And you are making them public now by returning to the castle, as if you have every right to be here." Lady Margaret's smile was perfectly pleasant, but her eyes were cold. "I am only thinking of His Grace's welfare. He has endured so much because of you. It would be tragic if he were to be hurt again. I have no intention of hurting him. Intentions are such fragile things, are they not?" Lady Margaret rose gracefully. I am staying at Westmore for the autumn. I look forward to seeing more of you, Miss Sinclair. I am sure we shall become great friends. She swept out of the drawing room, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Amelia stood motionless for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly. She had faced many challenges in her life. Her brother's cruelty, 20 years of solitude, the terrifying uncertainty of returning to Nathaniel. But she had never faced an enemy like Lady Margaret Hargrove. This woman did not simply want to marry Nathaniel. She wanted to destroy anyone who stood in her way. And Amelia, whether she wished it or not, was standing in her way. The campaign began subtly. At first, Amelia barely noticed the small inconveniences, the misplaced letters, the cancelled invitations, the servants who suddenly seemed too busy to attend to her requests. She attributed them to the natural chaos of a large household, the lingering suspicion of a staff who remembered the scandal of 20 years ago. But then the whispers started. She heard them in the village when she went to purchase ribbon for her sewing. She heard them from the maids who cleaned her room, their voices dropping to silence the moment she entered. She heard them in the careful, pitying looks directed her way by people who had been perfectly friendly only days before. Poor woman, losing her mind, they say, ran away from her brother's cruelty, but the damage was done. Not quite right in the head, is she? His Grace is so kind to let her stay. The whispers were always the same. Amelia Sinclair was unstable. Amelia Sinclair was not to be trusted. Amelia Sinclair had been driven mad by her brother's abuse, and was now a fragile, pitiable creature, who might do anything, say anything, believe anything. It was a brilliant strategy, Amelia realized with grudging admiration. Lady Margaret was not trying to prove that Amelia was wicked. She was trying to prove that Amelia was unreliable, that her story about forged letters and hidden threats was the product of a disturbed mind, that her return was not an act of love but a symptom of delusion. And the most insidious part was that Amelia could not fight back. If she protested too loudly, she would only prove Lady Margaret's point. If she remained silent, the whispers would continue unchecked. She was trapped in a web of someone else's making, and she could feel the strands tightening around her. You must tell His Grace, Mrs. Davies said one evening, bringing Amelia a cup of tea she had not requested. He would put a stop to it immediately. Tell him what? That there are rumors about me? There have always been rumors about me. I left a duke at the altar. The rumors will follow me to my grave. Amelia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Besides, I have no proof that Lady Margaret is behind them. She is too clever to leave evidence. You have no proof, but you have no doubts either. No, I have no doubts. Mrs. Davies was silent for a moment. She had been at Stonehaven for 30 years, had watched Nathaniel grow from a solemn boy into a forbidding man, had witnessed the aftermath of the wedding that never happened. She had been polite but distant when Amelia first arrived. Something had shifted since then. Perhaps the sight of Amelia on her knees in the rose garden, day after day, coaxing life back into the dead earth. You know, the housekeeper said quietly, I was here on the day you were supposed to be married. I saw His Grace's face when he came out of the vestry. I have never seen a man look so broken. I thought I would never see him smile again. He does not smile much now. No, but he has been different since you returned. Less cold, more present. Mrs. Davies met her eyes. Do not let Lady Margaret drive you away, Miss Sinclair. Whatever her schemes, whatever her rumors, you are the only one who has ever made him feel. Do not give up on him now. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. I do not intend to give up, but I do not know how to fight an enemy I cannot see. Then do not fight her. Fight for him. Let him see the truth of who you are. Let him see that you are not the broken woman Lady Margaret is painting you to be. The housekeeper's voice was firm. The truth is stronger than rumors, if you have the courage to stand in it. That night, Amelia sat alone in her chamber, staring at the locket she had kept for 20 years. It was a simple thing, a gold oval no larger than her thumbnail, containing a miniature painting of the rose garden. Nathaniel had given it to her on her 19th birthday, 3 months before he proposed. She remembered the way his fingers had brushed against her neck as he fastened the clasp, the way his voice had gone low and rough when he said, "So you will always carry a piece of home with you, wherever you go." She had worn it every day for 20 years. It had been her talisman, her reminder, her proof that once, long ago, someone had loved her completely. Now she opened the locket and looked at the faded painting inside. The rose garden as it had been 20 years ago. Perfect, and ordered, and beautiful. The rose garden she was trying, against all odds, to restore. Do not let Lady Margaret drive you away. Do not give up on him now. Amelia closed the locket and made a decision. She would not fight Lady Margaret with rumors and counter-rumors. She would not stoop to the level of whispered accusations and social manipulation. She would fight with truth, with patience, with the quiet, stubborn love that had sustained her for 20 years and would sustain her for 20 more if necessary. She would show Nathaniel who she really was. Not the frightened girl who had run away. Not the broken woman Lady Margaret was painting her to be. But the person she had become. The woman who had survived loss and loneliness and come home at last. And she would trust that the man she loved would see the truth. The Dowager Duchess knew something was wrong the moment she entered the morning room. Her son was standing by the window, his back to the door, his posture rigid with tension. On the table beside him lay a letter, a single sheet of expensive paper covered in elegant handwriting. Nathaniel? He did not turn. Mother, I did not expect you until Thursday. I decided to come early. What has happened? In answer, he gestured toward the letter. Lady Margaret sent this. She thought I should know what is being said about Miss Sinclair in the village. The Dowager Duchess picked up the letter and scanned its contents. Her expression hardened with each line. This is poison, she said flatly. Cleverly worded poison, but poison nonetheless. She is suggesting that Amelia is mentally unstable, that her story about the forged letters is a fantasy. It seems Lady Margaret has made inquiries. She has discovered that Amelia lived alone for 20 years, with no family, no close friends, no connections to speak of. She suggests that such isolation might have affected her mind. And you believe this? I do not know what to believe. Nathaniel's voice was anguished. Amelia's story is extraordinary. Forged letters, hidden threats, a 20-year search for evidence that only she has ever seen. Is it so unreasonable to question whether such a story could be true? And the letters she showed you? The confession from her brother? They could be forgeries. She could have written them herself. I want to believe her, Mother. God knows I want to. But how can I be certain? How can I trust that this is not some elaborate deception? The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully measured. Let me tell you something about Amelia Sinclair, she said. When she first arrived, I was prepared to hate her. I remembered the scandal, the humiliation, the way you retreated into yourself after she left. I blamed her for everything. I wanted to see her suffer. But when I looked at her, I did not see the woman I had built in my mind. I saw someone who had been broken by circumstances beyond her control. I saw someone who had sacrificed everything, her name, her future, her happiness, because she believed she was protecting you. I saw someone who had spent 20 years living in the shadow of a choice she never wanted to make. She moved closer to her son. And I saw someone who still loves you, deeply, completely, with a love that has survived 2 decades of silence and separation. That is not the love of a delusional woman. That is not the love of a deceiver. That is the love of someone who has carried you in her heart every single day since she left. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You believe her story. I believe her. But more importantly, I believe in her. I have watched her work in that garden, day after day, refusing to give up on something everyone else had declared dead. I have watched her endure Lady Margaret's subtle cruelties without complaint or retaliation. I have watched her hope, even when hope seemed impossible. She took her son's hand. That is not the behavior of a madwoman. That is the behavior of someone who loves you enough to wait. How long will you make her wait? The question hung in the air between them. Nathaniel turned away, his face unreadable. I am afraid, he said quietly. I am afraid to believe her. I am afraid to let myself love her again. Because if I do, and she leaves, she will not leave, unless you drive her away, or unless Lady Margaret succeeds in destroying her reputation so thoroughly that she has no choice but to go. The Dowager Duchess's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps it is time to deal with Lady Margaret directly. The confrontation happened at a dinner party 2 weeks later. It was a small affair by Stonehaven standards. Only 30 guests, local gentry rather than titled nobility, an informal gathering to mark the end of the harvest season. Lady Margaret had invited herself, as she always did, and had spent the first hour of the evening attaching herself to Nathaniel with the tenacity of a limpet. Amelia had been seated at the far end of the table, a deliberate snub that she bore with quiet dignity. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her hair arranged simply but elegantly. She was not trying to compete with Lady Margaret's fashionable splendor. She was simply trying to remind Nathaniel of the woman she had been, and the woman she still was. The dinner proceeded smoothly, until the moment Lady Margaret raised her voice to address the entire table. "I have been thinking," she announced, "about the fascinating story Miss Sinclair has brought to our attention. The forged letters, the hidden threats, the 20-year mystery. It is all quite extraordinary, is it not? Like something from a Gothic novel." A ripple of nervous laughter ran around the table. Amelia felt her stomach clench. "It occurs to me," Lady Margaret continued, "that we have only Miss Sinclair's word for any of this. She shows us letters that she claims to have discovered in a hunting lodge. She tells us a story about her brother's cruelty. But where is the proof? Where are the witnesses? Surely such an extraordinary tale requires some corroboration." She turned to Amelia with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I mean no offense, Miss Sinclair, but you must understand how this appears. A woman returns after 20 years, claiming she abandoned her betrothed to save him from a threat that never materialized. She produces letters that only she has verified. She expects everyone to simply believe her. One might almost think she was trying to take advantage of His Grace's generous nature." The silence around the table was deafening. Every eye turned to Amelia. She felt the weight of their stares, the prickle of their judgment. For a moment she was 22 again, standing in her wedding chamber, holding a letter that would destroy everything she loved. For a moment she was tempted to retreat, to deflect, to make some quiet excuse and flee the room. But she was not 22 anymore. She was 42, and she had spent 20 years learning to stand her ground. "You are right, Lady Margaret," she said, her voice calm and clear. "My story is extraordinary. It requires faith that I have not yet earned from many of you. I understand that. I accept it." She rose from her seat, drawing every eye in the room. "But I would like to ask a question in return. What possible motive could I have for inventing such a story? If I were a fortune hunter, as some have implied, why would I have stayed away for 20 years? Why would I have lived in poverty and obscurity when I could have returned at any time and claimed the Duke's protection? Why would I have spent 2 decades searching for evidence to prove my innocence, if my story were a lie?" She looked directly at Lady Margaret. "The truth is that I left Nathaniel Harrington because I loved him. I left because I believed, wrongly, as it turned out, that my presence in his life would destroy him. I left because I was young and frightened and alone, and I made the worst decision of my life out of the best intentions I had." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not look away. "I have spent 20 years paying for that decision. I have spent 20 years loving a man I could not be with, protecting a man who did not know he needed protecting, hoping for a future I did not deserve. I have no proof of my story beyond the letters I have shown and the truth in my heart. If that is not enough for some of you, I understand. But I will not be called a liar in this house, not when every word I have spoken has been true." She sat down. The silence continued for a long, agonizing moment. And then Nathaniel rose. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He looked at Lady Margaret, and there was something in his eyes that made the blood drain from her face. "Lady Margaret," he said, his voice cold as winter stone, "you have been a guest in my home on many occasions. I have tolerated your presence because of the long connection between our families, but you have crossed a line tonight that cannot be uncrossed. My Lord Duke, you were only trying to destroy the reputation of a woman who has done nothing to deserve your malice. You have spread rumors. You have whispered poison. You have attempted to undermine my trust in someone I care about. And tonight, you have insulted her publicly at my own table." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft and absolutely final. "You are no longer welcome at Stonehaven. You will leave tonight, and you will not return. If I hear that you have continued to spread lies about Miss Sinclair, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that your own reputation suffers the damage you have tried to inflict on hers. Is that understood?" Lady Margaret's composure cracked. "You cannot be serious. Over her? Over a woman who abandoned you at the altar?" "Over a woman I love," Nathaniel said. "A woman I have always loved. A woman I should have believed from the moment she returned. I failed her once, 20 years ago. I will not fail her again. He turned to Amelia and extended his hand. Will you walk with me in the garden? Amelia stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Then she placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close around hers, and let him lead her out of the dining room. Behind them, the silence erupted into whispers. None of them mattered. The garden was bathed in moonlight, silver and shadow, the roses she had pruned and tended casting delicate patterns against the stone walls. Nathaniel did not speak as they walked, and Amelia did not press him. She could feel the tension in his hand, the slight tremor that betrayed emotions he was still struggling to control. They stopped at the center of the garden, beside the fountain that had been dry for 20 years. During her weeks of work, Amelia had cleaned the basin and repaired the cracks in the stone, but the water had not yet been restored. I owe you an apology, Nathaniel said finally. You owe me nothing. I owe you everything. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his eyes were no longer cold. They were warm, and pained, and filled with an emotion she had not seen in 20 years. You sacrificed your entire life to protect me. You lived in hiding for 2 decades, because you believed you were saving my family. And when you finally came back, I repaid you with suspicion and distance and doubt. You had every right to be suspicious. I left without explanation. I stayed away for 20 years. Anyone would have doubted my story. But I should not have. I should have trusted what I knew of your character. I should have remembered the woman I fell in love with, the woman who was kind and honest and incapable of deliberate cruelty. Instead, I let my own fear convince me that you might have been deceiving me all along. He reached up and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. I am sorry, Amelia, for not believing you, for not trusting you, for 20 years of silence when I should have searched harder, looked longer, refused to give up until I found you. You did search. Not hard enough, not long enough. I convinced myself that you did not want to be found, but the truth is that I was afraid of what I might discover, afraid that you had left because you did not love me. It was easier to bury my feelings than to face the possibility that you had never cared for me at all. Amelia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I have always cared for you. From the moment we met, there has never been anyone else. There never could be. I know. Nathaniel's voice was rough. I know that now. I think I always knew it, somewhere beneath the pride and the pain, and the 20 years of denial. I think my heart recognized the truth even when my mind refused to accept it. He leaned his forehead against hers. I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of living behind walls. I am tired of pretending that I do not love you, when loving you is the truest thing I have ever done. Then stop pretending, Amelia whispered. Please, stop pretending. And finally, after 20 years of waiting, Nathaniel Harrington kissed her. It was not the kiss they should have shared on their wedding night, young and eager and full of promise. It was something deeper, something harder one, a kiss that carried the weight of all the years they had lost, all the pain they had endured, all the love they had buried but never destroyed. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. Marry me, Nathaniel said. Not in a grand ceremony with 400 guests, not in a church filled with people who whispered about us for 20 years. Marry me here, in the garden you brought back to life. Just us, and my mother, and whatever roses are still blooming. Amelia laughed, a sound that was half sob. You want to marry me, after everything? I have wanted to marry you since the moment I met you. I have never stopped wanting to marry you. The only question is whether you will have me. Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times yes. And in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the roses that had survived against all odds, Nathaniel Harrington and Amelia Sinclair began the future they should have started 20 years ago. They were married 3 weeks later. It was a small ceremony, as Nathaniel had promised. Just the Dowager Duchess, the household staff, and the village vicar who had known Nathaniel since he was a boy. The roses had rallied for the occasion, producing a final flush of autumn blooms in shades of pink and white and deepest crimson. Amelia wore a gown of soft ivory silk, simpler than the elaborate confection she had planned for her first wedding. Her hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes that had not been there at 22. But when Nathaniel looked at her, she felt as beautiful as she ever had. The Dowager Duchess wept openly, something no one had ever seen her do. Mrs. Davies sniffled into her handkerchief. Even Collins, the head gardener, had to turn away and pretend to examine a rosebush when the vows were spoken. And Nathaniel, stern, cold, stone-hearted Nathaniel, smiled. It was not the carefully controlled expression he used for political negotiations. It was not the faint, ironic twist of his lips that appeared when something amused him. It was a real smile, warm and unguarded, and it transformed his face into something Amelia had not seen since the day he first told her he loved her. "You are my wife," he said afterward, as they stood together in the garden, the guests drifting back toward the castle for the wedding breakfast. "After 20 years, you are finally my wife. I should have been your wife all along. I am sorry I made you wait so long. You are here now. That is all that matters." He took her hand and led her to the fountain, where water was finally flowing again. She had not known he had arranged for it to be repaired. It was his wedding gift to her, a symbol of the life they were beginning together. "I have something else for you," he said, reaching into his coat. He withdrew a small velvet box and placed it in her hands. Inside was a locket, gold, like the one he had given her long ago. But this one contained a miniature of the garden as it looked now, the roses blooming, the fountain flowing, the paths cleared and inviting. "To replace the old one," Nathaniel said, "the one you carried through 20 years of exile. I wanted you to have something that represents our future, not our past." Amelia felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will treasure it always, but I will keep the old one too, to remind me of what we survived." "As you wish." He fastened the new locket around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Amelia." "Yes? I love you. I should have said it more often. Before. I should have said it every day. I will not make that mistake again." She looked up at him, at this man she had loved for more than half her life, and felt her heart overflow with a joy she had never expected to feel again. "I love you too," she said. "I have always loved you. I will always love you. And I will never leave you again." The years that followed were not without their challenges. Lady Margaret Hargrove, furious at her public humiliation, attempted to spread fresh rumors about Amelia's sanity, but her campaign found little purchase. The guests who had witnessed Nathaniel's declaration at the dinner party had carried the story across the county, and public opinion had shifted decisively in Amelia's favor. Lady Margaret eventually retreated to London, where her reputation never quite recovered from the Duke's rejection. The forged letters were burned in the library fireplace, witnessed by the Dowager Duchess and the family solicitor. Thomas Sinclair's confession was filed away in the Stonehaven archives, a record of the truth that would outlast them all. Amelia completed the restoration of the Rose Garden, and it became famous throughout the region. People traveled from neighboring counties to see the legendary garden that had risen from the dead, just as its mistress had. The Dowager Duchess, who had once been Amelia's harshest critic, became her closest friend. They spent long afternoons together in the garden, drinking tea and discussing everything from politics to poetry. And Nathaniel learned to feel again. It was not an easy process. 20 years of emotional suppression could not be undone overnight. There were moments when he retreated into his old coldness, when old fears resurfaced and he pulled away from her. But Amelia was patient. She had learned patience in her years of exile, and she used it now to gently, persistently, lovingly coax her husband back from the walls he had built around his heart. 1 year after their wedding, Amelia discovered she was with child. The news seemed impossible. She was 43 years old, long past the age when most women bore children. The physician warned them not to hope too fervently, that the risks were significant, that nature might not be kind. But the child grew, and Amelia grew with her. A daughter, born in the early summer, with her father's grey eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Rosalind, after the roses that had witnessed their reunion. Nathaniel held his daughter for the first time, with tears streaming down his face, making no effort to hide them. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is absolutely perfect." "She is ours," Amelia said, exhausted and joyful. "After everything, she is ours." The Dowager Duchess, who had long ago given up hope of grandchildren, became the most devoted grandmother in the history of grandmothers. She spoiled Rosalind shamelessly and declared that the child had inherited the best qualities of both her parents and none of their stubbornness. As for Nathaniel and Amelia, they grew old together in the castle that had waited for them. The years softened them both. Nathaniel's sternness gave way to a gentle humor that surprised everyone who had known the cold Duke of legend. Amelia's quiet reserve blossomed into a warmth that made Stonehaven feel less like a fortress and more like a home. They walked together in the rose garden every evening, weather permitting, and they never ran out of things to say to one another. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Amelia would think about the letter she had written on her wedding night, the words she had scribbled in fear and desperation, never imagining she would return. Do not search for me. Forget me if you can. Forgive me if you are able. He had searched for her. He had not forgotten her. And in the end, he had forgiven her. They had lost 20 years. They would never get them back. But they had found each other again, against all odds, and the years that remained were sweeter for having been so hard won. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, which was also, impossibly, the 40th anniversary of the wedding that never happened, Nathaniel gave Amelia a final gift. It was a portrait, not the one that had hung in the East Tower, the image of a young woman who no longer existed. A new portrait, commissioned from the finest artist in London, showing Amelia as she was now, silver-haired and soft-eyed, seated in the rose garden that she had brought back to life, with Rosalind beside her, and the towers of Stonehaven rising in the background. The old portrait was a memory, Nathaniel said, as she stared at the painting through tear-blurred eyes. This is our reality. This is the life we built together. I wanted you to see it, every day, and know that it was real. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Amelia said, and she meant it. They hung the portrait in the great hall, beside the portraits of Nathaniel's ancestors, all those generations of Harringtons who had loved and lost and endured. A quiet woman, who had once been a village teacher, who had once been a runaway bride, who had once been lost and was now, finally, found. And in the garden below, the roses continued to bloom. If you believe that true love is worth waiting for, even for 20 years, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Amelia after all that time? I read every single one.